Hi, Ridley Scott is one of the most popular directors working today. In this video essay, I will be discussing his distinctive filmmaking style and answering the question, to what extent is Ridley Scott an auteur director? To do this, I will break the question down into subsections. In the first section, I will discuss the concept of auteur theory, its origins, and the problems it presents. Second, I will discuss Scott's influence on one of the most successful and iconic franchises ever, Alien. Third, I will discuss Blade Runner and how Scott's lack of influence has affected his 2017 sequel, Blade Runner 2049. Fourth, I will outline what are commonly considered to be key themes in Scott's work. Fifth, I will collate this information and use it to determine the extent of Scott's authorship. And finally, in my sixth section, I will provide a clear conclusion with a concise summary of my argument. Ready? Let's go. Auteur theory is the idea that the director is the primary creative source behind a film. This means that regardless of the subject material, an auteur's distinctive filmmaking style is present nonetheless. Auteur theory can be seen in many mainstream modern-day directors. According to the BFI, these are people such as Tim Burton, Catherine Bigelow, and Martin Scorsese. These people present a clear and distinctive style through the use of narrative structure, recurrent themes, and camera work. These directors all present their films within a similar tone, appearance, or narrative. But to fully understand how auteur theory can be applied to modern directors, we have to understand where it came from. Time for a history lesson. From 1940 to 1944, under Nazi rule, British and American films were banned in France. This was particularly tragic to the generation of cinephiles living there like André Bazin and Jacques Donier Valcroze, who had grown up on France's rich cinematic culture of the 1920s to 30s. This meant, however, that France's own national cinema was able to grow and become a great source of pride for the country. In 1944, France was liberated from Nazi occupation, and in 1946, due to the Blum-Burns Agreement, a decade's worth of stockpiled American films streamed into France for the French cinephiles to catch up on. In 1948, an article named The Birth of a New Avant-Garde, La Camera Stylo, by French film critic Alexandre Estrac, was published, describing film as a form in which and by which an artist can express his thoughts, however abstract they may be, or translate his obsessions exactly as he does in the contemporary essay or novel. That is why I would like to call this new age of cinema the age of camera stylo. This was the first piece of academic writing to propose an idea resembling auteur theory of the camera stylo or camera pen. In 1951, the groundbreaking French magazine of film criticism, Cahiers du Cinéma, was founded by André Bazin and Jacques Donier Valcroze, who had been heavily influenced by Estrac's article and the idea of breaking away from the tyranny of narrative. The writers gathered by Bazin and Valcroze were all young French film critics who'd had access growing up to the American films unavailable during the occupation. These men were François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette, and Eric Rohmer. One of Cahiers' key guiding ideologies was the rejection of traditional montage-style filmmaking in favour of mise-en-scène. The second, which bears great similarity to the ideas proposed in the Estrac article, is that the best films are a personal artistic expression and should bear a stamp of personal authorship. The latter ideology uses film jargon similar to that of what would later be coined auteur or author theory. In 1954, by combining the ideas of Estrac and Bazin in Une certaine tendance du cinéma français, Truffaut criticised modern French cinema, stating, "I simply cannot bring myself to believe in a peaceful coexistence between the tradition of quality and the cinéma d'auteur." He criticised directors whose work didn't have a distinctive style and condemned them to the phrase metteurs en scène, scene setters who, while having the technical competence to create a film, lack an artistic vision to distinguish it amongst others. All of this culminated in 1962 when American film critic Andrew Sarris coined the term auteur theory in his essay Notes on the Auteur Theory in 1962 for Film Culture magazine, and was the first to bring the revolutionary notion into the eye of the American public. He had been influenced by the works of Auteur, Bazin and the Cahiers critics, stating that the three premises of the Auteur theory may be visualized as three concentric circles: the outer circle as technique, the middle circle personal style, and the inner circle interior meaning. This suggests the notion that a director's auteurship can be measured by deciding whether they fit into three categories. At the time, Sarris lists directors such as Jean Renoir, Alfred Hitchcock, and Orson Welles as being key examples of this. Sarris's base model for measuring whether a director is an auteur or not will be a useful method to apply to Ridley Scott, but first we need to know a bit more about Scott's artistic style, influence and success. Ridley Scott is a world builder, as described by Mark Kermode in his review of Alien Covenant.
Ridley Scott is a world builder in terms of cinema. This is the kind of cinema that he excels at, literally creating worlds. That's what he does, and he does it rather brilliantly.
It is part of Scott's trademark of filmmaking to create a universe that feels big. A large sense of scale is part of what makes his films distinctive, something also explored in the Robbie Collins review of Covenant, where he describes it as a mad scientist film, arguably one of the maddest. It's grandiose, exhilarating, vertiginously cynical and symphonically perverse. It is therefore safe to say that world building is the definitive term we can use to describe Scott's filmmaking. However, in relation to the films of the Alien franchise, their distinctive style was arguably created not by Scott, but by Swiss painter H.R. Giger in the original concept art of the first film. The aesthetics of the franchise has remained remarkably close to his drawings and is therefore arguably part of his style, not Scott's. In a Time magazine article, Scott describes Giger as being largely responsible for the iconic visual effects of the 1979 film, therefore crediting the style of the Alien franchise to Giger, not Scott. The Alien films have been interpreted in a variety of ways. This perhaps means it has no distinctive style of Scott's and is open for interpretation. For example, as listed in a Slate magazine article, we've had Alien as a feminist allegory, Alien as a mothering fable, Alien as an abortion parable, and Alien as a philosophical debate, with some writing aligning the alien attack on humans with an Althusserian Marxist takedown of humanism in general. The key point of conflict surrounding the original Blade Runner is the debate as to whether Deckard is a replicant or not. This idea was however not created by Scott, but accidentally by the writers. As Mark Kermode said in his video, The Mystery of Blade Runner, he found this out in the TV documentary he made, On the Edge of Blade Runner.
Now, interestingly, not everyone buys the Deckard as an android story. One of the other things that happened in the documentary is we got the two writers together, Hampton Fancher and David Webb-Peoples, who had written the script and worked on it separately. They hadn't actually sort of collaborated. The script had been going back and forth between them. And I asked them, whose idea was it that Deckard is an android? Because of course it's not there in the novel at all. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The hero is certainly not an android. And both writers ended up crediting the other with it. And it turned out that the whole idea had come out of a misapprehension. One of them had written a line in which Deckard had wondered about Rachel's end date, about how long she had as an android. And then he'd said, and what of my maker? What of my end date? Talking actually in spiritual terms. And the other writer had read that and thought, oh my word, he's an android. And had then somehow passed this on to Ridley Scott, who went, that's a brilliant idea. So between the three of them, they decided that Deckard was an android, although none of them actually thought that's what they were saying in the first place.
Ridley Scott was originally in mind to direct Blade Runner 2049, but was too busy. The replacement director, Denis Villeneuve, used very similar production techniques that Scott says he uses. For example, extensively storyboarding each shot.
In order to be very spontaneous on set, you need to, for me, I need to be very prepared. And specifically with a movie of that scale, everything will be designed, everything will be created. So the crew doesn't go mad. You need to really be precise. So you need to storyboard everything. I deeply love storyboarding.
I'm blessed with a photographic brain. And so I'll walk a location once and I can storyboard 3 months later.
Really?
Yeah, and then, but absolutely accurately. I distribute it to anybody else that's relevant, like the actors who love to have boards. My boards really, these are not stick figures. I can do fast boards really well. And so they can see where they're coming from, and they like that. The board's like writing, because if I'm stuck, I'll say, right, I'm a guy in Scotland, I'm going to start there, so I'll draw it. I'll think, I'll go inside. And so what's happening already is an editing room in here. I'm already editing. That's why boards for me are very important. That's my writing.
His production style is therefore arguably generic. However, Scott came into conflict with Philip K. Dick, the writer of the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, on which Blade Runner was based. The conflict was arguably because he wanted to change it so much to fit his distinctive style, made clear in an article by Leonard G. Heldreth in the book Retrofitting Blade Runner by Judith Kerman. In his article, The Cutting Edges of Blade Runner, Heldreth states, Blade Runner has caused controversy since its beginning. Initial disagreements between Ridley Scott, the director, and Philip K. Dick, author of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel on which it was based, found that always smouldering conflict between writers and filmmakers. However, it is arguable that Blade Runner is a conventional chase movie, and therefore from a story perspective is also generic and conventional. As described in Primitivism in the movies of Ridley Scott, Alien and Blade Runner by C. Carter Colwell, the particular strand within the tradition of American primitivism that Blade Runner embodies is the hunting of the beast. This term was first used by critic Richard Slotkin in his study Regeneration Through Violence, and describes a generic story feature that can easily be applied to Blade Runner, perhaps therefore proving its conventionality. Like I mentioned before, the Alien films have been interpreted as a feminist allegory. This isn't the only time when a Scott movie has featured strong issues around women. When it was released in the summer of '91, Thelma and Louise was declared the first movie I've ever seen which told the downright truth by a lesbian activist in Los Angeles and appealing to transformative violence by commentator John Leo. New York Daily News columnist Richard Johnson complained that it was degrading to men and justifies armed robbery, manslaughter, and chronic drunken driving as exercises in consciousness raising. The presentation of dystopia changes throughout Scott's films. This can be seen in the presentation of primitivism in Alien and Blade Runner, as described in the Colwell article. Blade Runner, 1982, expresses similar ambivalence inherited from the American tradition of primitivism, whereas Alien presents both the poles of primitivism's dichotomy as bad. Blade Runner takes a more positive, if equally ambivalent view, seeing both the primitive and the technological as both good and bad. Ridley Scott, when compared to Andrew Sarris's concentric circles of measuring whether someone is an auteur director or not, excels at technical competence, however lacks sometimes in personal style and interior meaning. He was also accused in a Wired magazine article that he will sacrifice character development in favour of world building, with the critics stating that if he stopped making films, then we won't have to spend more than 2 hours in a theatre and still leave unfulfilled. However, there are other directors who think that he has a distinctive style.
Ridley Scott has always been a tremendous influence on me. I've loved the worlds he's created, the textured quality of those things.
It is also arguable that he will inherently have a different view on filmmaking to other directors due to his lack of film school.
No film school. Film school to me was the first chance I got an opportunity to do a commercial. I was an art director first, I was a good art director.
So, is he an auteur? Well, it's still unclear.
On one hand, he can't be credited for all of the creative decisions made in his key films, as they were a collaborative effort with other artists and writers. On the other hand, he is the common denominator in a number of films that share a distinctive style of world building and has been described as an auteur by other directors. In conclusion, I think that Ridley Scott is an auteur. His distinctive style of world building and craftsmanship in creating reachable yet far-fetched films of fantasy, sci-fi and realism give a clear and present distinguishability to his films. Ridley Scott is an auteur director.